And you're doing that even though you have no corroboration of that, do you? Other than the defendant's word.
I have no corroboration other than things that are mentioned in the sex tape that would, you know.
Other than the defendant's word, you really don't have anything that corroborates this, do you? That corroborates this allegation of child pornography, do you?
No, I do not.
Yet you still chose to believe it, though, didn't you?
What I chose to believe was that there was domestic violence.
No, I'm not asking about domestic violence. I'm asking very specific questions about an incident that is claimed to have occurred on January 21 of 2008. If we could restrict our question and answer to that. With regard to that, you chose to believe that incident, and you, however it was that you went about it, not assumed, based on whatever it is that you did, you found that to be truthful, correct?
I found the kicking incident to be truthful. I'm not an expert on child pornography. I'm not an expert on sex addiction. I don't do that. But I took that into account as I took into account that when I saw Miss Arias, she had a broken finger.
Do you believe, based on this, that there was an incident?
I believe there was an incident, yes.
Involving child pornography, right?
Where that was part of it.
You do believe that, per the defendant's report, that Mr. Alexander was found masturbating to images of children on January 21 of 2008. You believe that?
I believe it.
And you believe it even though there's no report about it, right?
Yes.
And you believe it even though the defendant herself, at a time when this incident allegedly happened, writes that nothing noteworthy to report. You believe it anyway, right?
I believe it based on the other materials I've read.
I'm asking about this. Isn't it true that you believe it even though that's what's written there, correct?
I believe it because there's an
objection. There is more to this journal entry than just what the prosecutor is showing the witness.
Overruled. You continue with your response.
Go ahead.
I believe what I believe because I have looked at so much information and so much collateral data, much of which is in Mr. Alexander's own words. That's why I believe that there was domestic violence. That's what I was retained to look at. Was there domestic violence in this situation? And I'm being asked to stray from that. But the truth is, what I believe is that there's domestic violence. And that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm not here to talk about child pornography. I'm not here to talk about lots of other things, Mr. Martinez. I'm here to talk about what I know something about. And that's really what I want to convey to people, not something that I have peripheral knowledge of.
And all of the documentation that you reviewed, keeping out the defendant's statement, is there any indication whatsoever that Mr. Alexander was involved in this January 21, 2008 incident of child pornography?
Is there a reason to believe from IMs or from her journal?
From anything. Point out to me something in the record that says, for example, for Mr. Alexander, I did this, or I didn't. I did this. I did it on this thing.
He talks about corking a little girl in the sex tape. He talks
about where does he talk about corking a little girl, ma'am?
In the sex tape, he talks about. Hold on. He talks about her having an orgasm.
May I stop you there?
Yeah.
The sex tape that you're talking about, corking a little girl, is the one on May 10th of 2008. Okay, correct? Is that what we're talking about?
Correct.
Where else does he talk about?
There is talking about in that sex tape of having an orgasm like a little girl.
Right, okay. What else?
There is talk about on her drive to meet with him, that she's getting her Spider-Man underpants together, and does he want her to have braids or ponytails?
Well, let me talk to you about the Spider-Man underwear. Do you know who Cameron Diaz is?
Yes, I do.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Alexander was very taken with Cameron Diaz?
Overruled to me, answer.
Do you know that, whether or not?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether or not she was wearing any Spider-Man underwear in a movie called Charlie's Angels?
No, I don't.
So you really don't know why Mr. Alexander may have been interested in Spider-Man underwear, do you?
No, I don't.
And in fact, of all the things that you've told us, so far there's no indication at all that he's interested in any little boys, right?
No.
And the allegation by the defendant is that it involved little boys, right?
Yes.
After that, you indicate that on the next day after that is that there's this incident, supposedly, where there's physical violence inflicted upon the defendant, correct?
Correct.
Is that the second incident? We've talked about one. Is that the second incident?
Yes, it is.
When is the third incident? Or the fourth?
The third incident is in March of 2008 when they are discussing her moving to Wairika.
And then the fourth incident is when, ma'am?
The fourth incident is in April.
And ma'am, looking at all of those four incidents taken together, is there anywhere in the journals that you have seen where there's any indication whatsoever that Mr. Alexander has physically hurt the defendant?
Just in general.
Not in general. I'm talking about specifically on those dates that you now have.
Specific to the dates?
Yes.
No.
And is there any indication of any medical reports anywhere?
No, there is not.
Are there any police reports anywhere?
No, there is not.
Even though you don't have any of that and all you have is the defendant's words, you've decided to go ahead and adopt the defendant's version of events, even though all you have is her word, correct?
Most of the time, you have nothing more than somebody's words and collaborative data because most women don't report.
And with regard to stalking, all you have right now is Mr. Alexander's word and the corroborative data that we talked about previously this morning, right?
I have corroborative data that's counterintuitive to stalking.
And that the thing that's counterintuitive to the stalking is the fact that he continued to have contact with her, right?
That he continues to have ongoing contact, initiated.
Right.
Yes.
And it's the same for her, that she, even after the supposed incident of pedophilia occurs, she continues to have contact with him, including sexual intercourse, correct?
Correct.
And so his conduct is being judged by the same standard, though, according to you, right?
I repeated before that stalking behavior is different than domestically violent behavior when you look at the context, and that stalking can be part, but the worst kinds of domestic violence, which is what you're looking at in terrorism, that kind of stalking behavior I don't see in either Mr. Alexander or in Miss Arias. I don't see a pattern of that kind of stalking with either of them, that either of them are stalking the other.
With regard to sexual humiliation and degradation, that's another one of the factors that's listed under terrorism, correct?
Correct.
And you're familiar with the May 26, 2008 instant message, correct?
Correct.
In it, Mr. Alexander indicates that he's upset with the defendant because he's nothing more than a dildo with a heartbeat, right?
Correct.
Doesn't that seem to indicate that Mr. Alexander doesn't view his role as in having sex with the defendant in a very positive light?
Well, there's a lot more to that email.
I'm not asking you a lot more of the email. We could talk. There's a lot more text messages. There's a lot more journal entries. I want to talk about that message and that statement specifically. Do you understand me when I say that?
Yes.
Doesn't that statement indicate that Mr. Alexander feels that he's being somewhat degraded to the point that he's nothing more than a dildo, right?
Objection, speculation is what Mr. Alexander thought.
Sustained.
Well, he does say that he is nothing more than a dildo, right, with a heartbeat.
He does say that.
In your assessment of things, because you are assessing things, that's not a good thing, is it?
No, it's not.
So that conceivably could fit here under sexual humiliation and degradation if you were conducting this examination to view whether or not the defendant is the abuser in this case.
I would look at patterns, and I don't see patterns. I see him in a rant when he is very angry, talking about that. I've never seen that mentioned in any of the other information I've looked at. I've never seen him describe that. And in fact, unfortunately, he is acting in a sexual way that would allow him, with other women, with his phone sex, to allow him to feel that way.
And bottom line, that is not a good thing in terms of this being a dildo with a heartbeat, right?
No, it would not be a good thing.
Judge, may we approach for a minute, please?
May continue.
Ma'am, this 558 also indicates that generally, is that more? Is that what the word is there? Can you take a look at it? Is that more?
I'm not sure where you're pointing to.
This word right here.
Oh, more.
Why don't we look at this Exhibit 614? What does that say?
Generally more regular physical abuse, but may occur without physical.
So when we're talking about this terrorism and the stalking, is that there doesn't have to be any physical abuse, correct?
Correct.
And there's no allegation here, at least that we know of, that the defendant ever physically abused Mr. Alexander, correct?
Correct.
The other thing that we have here, though, is this insidious or psychological abuse, don't we?
Yes.
And that can be done by words, right?
Correct.
It can be done by action, correct?
Correct.
It can be done by things such as being manipulative with an individual. Couldn't it?
If there's a pattern.
Right. And if an individual is manipulated over time, then that has a tendency, if you will, to create this psychological abuse, right?
In a context of other things.
Right. And you indicated previously that with regard to meeting or finding that there's terrorism, that you don't have to find all of the factors here, correct? You only have to find some of them, right?
And I didn't find terrorism.
I didn't say that you found or didn't find terrorism. I'm saying that in order to make the assessment as to whether or not there's terrorism, you don't have to meet every one of these 8 factors, correct?
And there may be things that are not listed also.
So the answer is yes. The answer is you do not need to find all 8 factors, correct?
No.
And so if in this case, if we were to find that there was the stalking and that Mr. Alexander was extremely afraid of the defendant because of that stalking, and then if we find that there was psychological abuse on her part, and then we also find that we don't need to find physical abuse, but that there was this sexual humiliation and degradation, and then if we couple that with Exhibit 558 and we talk about the family of origin issues, it does appear that the person who was the perpetrator, the abuser in this relationship was the defendant, right?
Not at all.
Not in your assessment, right?
Not in my assessment.
I think we needed to.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a noon recess at this time. Please be back in the designated area at 1:25. We will start promptly at 1:30. Please remember the admonition. You are excused.
Please come to the jury.
We are at recess in chambers.